Getting an echo. So if everyone can go on mute, our recording is now in progress.
Okay, we're live and good to go.
Good evening. My name is Monica Gant, and I am the Associate Secretary of the Academic Support Team for the Delaware Department of Education. And I have the pleasure of welcoming you to the Delaware COVID-19 Academics and Equity Work Group meeting. This June 3rd, 2020 meeting is being called to order at 5:00 p.m. This meeting is being held electronically. On March 12, 2020, Governor Carney issued a declaration of a state of emergency for the state of Delaware due to a public health threat. The state of emergency allows all public meetings of executive branch public bodies, including the Delaware COVID-19 Education Working Group meetings, to be conducted electronically, either by means of telephone conference call or video conference call. The information regarding this meeting, including information on how to access the meeting electronically, was published on May 27, 2020, and posted on the state public meeting calendar site. Individuals may participate in this meeting via the DDOE YouTube channel publicized on the agenda. These meetings are public meetings to provide transparency and the opportunity for the public to engage in the process. In order to enable every participant to have voice, public comment will be accepted via email at reopeningideas@doe.k12.de.us or voicemail at 302-735-4244. All comments and ideas will be forwarded to the respective work groups for review and posted on DDOE's website as well, www.doe.k12.de/PAGE/411. Each week, public comment is compiled from the previous week and posted online. A copy is also provided to the work group chairs to then share overall themes related to responses that may impact the work at hand. We encourage working groups to review these comments online before each meeting. Our meeting structure will follow the same format each week. We will begin with an opening, which will include a summary of public comments, purpose, goal, and group agreements. An assignment recap focused on engagement in a topic discussion and criteria review. A discussion focused on identifying the key considerations of the topic by scenario, and concluding with the next steps with a guiding question for the upcoming topic. While all of us would prefer to engage in this work face-to-face, we are in the position of having to meet in this virtual space. Our norm for engaging in our online meeting is that we begin with muted microphones and, if possible, video camera on so that we can see visual cues if needed to confirm clarity and sound. To ensure our public audience can fully engage in our meeting, we ask that you not use the chat box feature. When you would like to provide feedback, you may raise your hand in the participant box and we will acknowledge you. Please raise your hand now to let us know that you are able to notify us.
Did we start yet? I'm sorry, I'm late.
We just started. We're raising our hand just to make sure that our notification's working.
P.S. WebEx is the worst. Zoom, GoToMeeting. This has been terrible every time I try to get on.
And we live on the internet.
Okay. Has everybody had an opportunity to raise their hand?
No, where's the raise your hand feature on this?
Having trouble finding it as well.
Hand is a Zoom function.
If you go to the bottom of your screen, unmute our microphones. If we can unmute our microphones. Kevin, would you share with everyone exactly where the raise your hand feature is?
One place you can find it is you have an ellipse on your control panel if you're using a desktop app. You should also be able to find it in the participant menu to the right. Next to your name, you should be able to toggle on and off a little hand.
Is there anyone in our committee that's still having trouble locating?
I am. I'm sorry. It's Matt. Where were the two spots? I apologize again.
No, you're fine. So if you are having trouble with your raise your hand feature, please make sure that you just unmute yourself when you're ready to speak. Keep our microphones off so that we can continue to not have the feedback. So Dr. Burrows, you're always welcome just to unmute when you're ready to speak. We're going to do the same thing with those participants that raise their hand. And then we'll acknowledge that it's for them to speak. For our viewing public, the raise the hand feature is only for our committee members. So it's not on the YouTube live portion of this website. Thank you. So if everyone can lower their hands now, we'll continue. Since this is our first work group meeting, we will extend the welcome and introduction portion of our agenda to allow time for each member to briefly introduce themselves and share their role in the Academics and Equity Work Group. This will serve as a chance to gain greater understanding of how each of our strengths fit together to engage in the Academic and Equity Work Group. I stress brief because of our limited time together. It will be focused on our charge. So what we're going to do is actually use the next slide. And in the order that you appear on the slide, we'll ask you to unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and then your role in this group, starting with Dr. Burrows.
Yes, hi, I'm Matt Burrows. I'm the superintendent at Appoquinimink School District, and I'm excited to serve as a member of this group.
Laura Schneider, a principal with the Seaford School District.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Thomas, and I am the Delaware Educators Rising president, and I am here as a student voice.
Hi, I'm Loretta Gregg. I'm a parent with the Lake Forest School District, and I'm happy to be here.
Good evening. I'm Lisa Lawson. I serve as the Executive Director for Special Education and Student Support Services in the Brandywine School District.
If Eugene Young is not here, we're going to move on to Dr. Alonso.
Hello, my name is Dr. Maria Alonso, and I'm board chair of Academia Antonio Alonso Charter School.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rebecca Vitelli, and I am the 2020 Delaware Teacher of the Year. I am finishing up my 4th year teaching in an inclusive preschool classroom at the Colonial Early Education Program in Newcastle, Delaware. Honored and excited to be here. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Stephanie Ingram. I am a 4th grade teacher in the Colonial School District, and I am also the president of the Delaware State Education Association. I'm here to represent our more than 13,000 members and the public school students they serve.
Hello, I'm Allison Castellanos. I am an ESL teacher at Delaware Technical Community College, and I live here in Georgetown, Delaware.
Gwendolyn Haar. I am an English language arts teacher at Dover High School, part of the Capital School District.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kim Williams. I'm the state rep in the 19th district, and I'm vice chair of the House Education Committee. I'm happy to see many of you. I haven't seen you in a while, so thank you for hosting tonight too. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tizzy Lockman, and I'm the state senator for the 3rd District, so in the city of Wilmington. And I get to serve as vice chair of the Senate Education Committee and co-chair of the Reading Consortium for Educational Equity. Great to be here with you all.
Good evening, everyone. This is Representative Brian Shoup, the 36th District, which is Milford and Lincoln area, and I'm on the Education Committee in the House of Representatives as well.
Senator Brian Pettyjohn, Senator of the 19th District, as opposed to Kim, who's the representative of the 19th District, which is on completely opposite ends of the state. I'm in Sussex County. My territory is all the way from Bridgeville, Delaware, Maryland line, all the way to the Rehoboth Bay at the Long Neck area. Great to be on here.
And Cricket, will you introduce yourself from Opportunity Lab, please?
Hi, everyone. My name is Juliette Hines. I go by Cricket, and I'm working for a nonprofit called Opportunity Labs. We are here to support the Delaware Department of Education to provide recommendations to Dr. Bunting, and I'm honored to be here with you all.
And I'd love for my co-chair to introduce himself as well.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Ashley Giska. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for the Laurel School District, and it's an honor to work with all of you on this important work, as well as with Dr. Gant and Cricket. So I'm looking forward to our conversation this evening. Thanks.
Thank you all. So it is evident that the contribution of every member of our work group is valuable and critical to the recommendations that the Academic and Equity Work Group generates. As a result, I ask that you consider the following work group agreements. Please engage fully, remain focused on our goal. We know that you come with many thoughts about reopening that may not be necessarily a part of our discussion, but we've created a parking lot to capture your thoughts that may belong in a different group or one of our later meetings. And so there's a link there that's actually for Cricket to be able to type in anything that shows up that really kind of fits in our parking lot and may not be pertinent to what we're talking about for that particular meeting. Please be mindful of other members. Every voice is valuable. So we want to make sure that each voice has an opportunity to speak, which is why we kind of practice with the raising hands. And if that doesn't work for us, we will find another avenue, just making sure that every voice is heard. We want to be solutions focused. And so we know that there are many, many challenges, but our job as a committee is really to seek solutions. And then we must assume good intentions. Everyone comes here from a good place. They are advocating, they are representing, but they're also really working hard to make sure that we do what's good for children in Delaware. And so please assume good intentions by everyone in the conversation. Again, because we want to be transparent, just a reminder, we're not going to use our chat feature. We have one activity that we will use it for, and we will share that information with the public, but we're not going to use it during the meeting. If you have something that you need to respond to, we'll use our raise a hand feature. It's the responsibility of the co-chairs to hold all members of our work group to those agreements, to honor your time and contribution. We will reference the agreements when needed to ensure that we are positioned to fulfill our charge and provide our recommendations to the Secretary of Education. Based on our review of the public comments that we received over the past few weeks, most were concerned about school in the fall. There were almost an equal number of passionate pleas to reopen school buildings as arguments to keep schools closed and continue remote learning. In her comments, one of the public commenters, Sarah Green, asked what strategies are being proposed to help teachers provide more individualized education to every student, considering different home environments and levels of access and support that students have experienced over time. It's concerns like these from our stakeholders. That is why our work is so important and why these committees were built with diversified perspectives. It is important to restate that our charge is to provide recommendations to the Secretary through the lens of educational equity within 3 public health scenarios. We are not charged with determining whether school buildings are open or closed, nor are we charged with creating requirements for remote learning. Through our common understanding that we will develop during each meeting, we will provide feedback in response to key considerations of equity, assessment, and instruction when we start school, either in person, remotely, or in combination of both that we often refer to as hybrid. This feedback will feed into our final recommendations. So we're planning for the start of school. We're not saying the building will be open, but school will begin. And so that is our conversation. If there are any questions, this would be a great time to ask about what our charge is, because we're going to dig into our work. So if you have any questions about what our charge is, please ask now. Awesome. So now that we're clear on the purpose, I'm going to ask, and this is the only time that we're going to use the chat box. We're going to give it a shot. Cricket, are you ready?
I think so. I will get it to you, back to you, no matter what, somehow.
So Cricket's job is to capture the one word that you identify or that comes to your mind when you think of academics. So we would love for every committee member to type that one word in the chat. One word that comes to mind when you think of academics. And Mr. Giska, if you want to call out the words that you see, it might be helpful for Cricket.
You got it, Dr. Gant. So far we have students, engagement, instruction, learning, 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 and learning, future, education, enlightenment, progress, literacy, relationship, and engagement.
Oh, she cheated.
I like it. My favorite one yet. Am I allowed to pick a favorite? I won't.
No, you cannot pick a favorite.
I've not, but I do love books.
Has everyone submitted a response?
I believe we have all the responses. Let me see. Yes, I think so.
Awesome.
Great job, everybody.
Oh, you know what, Cricket? I have to go out of it to come back in it to see it.
I know. I was thinking, Monica, I can share my screen, but Ashley really captured everything we have here. Lots of engagement and learning.
Okay, we're going to leave it.
Sounds good.
So there seemed like a common theme around learning. Tell me again, Cricket.
Engagement, students, instruction, learning, future, education, enlightenment, progress, literacy, relationship, and engagement.
Awesome. Awesome.
Books. Don't forget books.
And books.
Books. Oh my.
Awesome. So now we're going to engage in one more activity in the chat. This will be our last activity for the chat box, and then we'll put our chat box away. In one word, what comes to mind when you think of equity? It's tough to come up with one word, isn't it? One word for equity.
I'll go ahead and read some of the ones we have here, Dr. Gant. Fairness or fair, inclusion, access, comprehensive, access, empathy.
Okay, Mr. Giska, you are now the teacher. Do we have all of our
We don't have one from everyone yet, but the list is now growing. Access to success.
It's 3 words. That's okay.
Impartial. Equity literacy. Equal. Empathy again.
How are we doing?
Empathy. We are
15.
We are at 15, yes. Just a
Wonderful.
couple more.
So Cricket, if you'll read those again for us, since we can't see it on the screen.
Okay, we have fairness, fair, inclusion, access, access, comprehensive, access, empathy, access to success, impartial, equity literacy, sorry, equal, empathy, empathy.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for participating. So the reason that we did that is really to make sure that we come to common understanding about the topic that we are tackling. And so the next several slides are really to just ensure that we're all thinking about equity in the same way. Academics will be the work that we do moving forward, of course, but we want to begin with equity and then entrench everything that we're doing in it. So many of you may have seen this, this visual before. What strikes us about this visual is that while equity and equality are often used synonymously, there is a difference. And I think that the next slide really talks about the difference. Equality is equal input, but equity is equal outcome. Another great slide from the National Alliance for Partnerships and Equity is when every student has what they need to succeed. If they have things that are equal, but it does not ensure their success, then that's not really equity. And then the final slide from Get Smart Oregon, equality is sameness, giving everyone the same thing, whereas equity is fairness, access to the same opportunities. So equality works really well if everyone starts from the same place. However, it is a challenge if they don't. And so when we're thinking about equity, we're really defining it as every child gets what they need in our schools. Every child, regardless of where they come from, what they look like, who their parents are, what their temperament is, and what they show up knowing or not knowing. This is what teaching is. This is what we do. And so this is really how we're going to think about equity, not just specific groups of students, but all students. And then what does each of those different students need? So I'm going to transition to my co-chair so that we can really think about, because we've been talking a lot about equity and educational equity, but what does that look like within the public health framework, which is really what our charge is.
Okay, Dr. Gannon. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time here giving the committee some background on the public health framework and sort of what the different scenarios are we're dealing with. And then we'll introduce some criterion to address equity within those scenarios. So if we go to the next slide, there's really 3 possible scenarios that public health and DPH and everyone that's involved on that side of this equation is looking at. And those 3 scenarios are the following. A scenario with COVID-19 that results in peaks and valleys. So this would be the first wave of COVID-19 occurring in the spring, obviously, and then a representative or several follow-on outbreaks that are similar of scale. So that's one possibility that we're dealing with. A second possibility that exists within the COVID-19 scenario would be a fall peak, where we had this event that took place here in spring of 2020, a slowdown as far as infections, and then we would actually reach our peak in the fall of 2020, which of course would have a dramatic impact on how we go about opening schools or continuing on through school in the fall. So that's one that we have to consider. And the final one would be a scenario around COVID-19 that looks like a slow burn, where we had the event where we had mass spread and lots of things like that, which I'll talk about some of the math behind that in the spring, but then we continue with a slower, lower amount of infections that continue on up through 2021. So those are sort of the three different scenarios that exist and that we're trying to respond to in our different categories in terms of our task force. And of course, we're looking at academics and equity and how to exist or provide an equitable situation for students, depending upon which one of those happen. We go to the next slide. So I'm not 100% sure of how many of you are familiar with the term R-naught. R-naught is a term that it's represented on your screen. It looks like RO. R-naught is a mathematical term that folks in infectious disease use to quantify how infectious a particular illness is. So for example, you can see an R-naught of less than 1 would be a no to minimal spread within our community. And as far as the Delaware roadmap to recovery goes, that puts us in phases 2 to 3, where school buildings would be open, regardless of those scenarios we talked about before. An R-naught, or how infectious the disease is, that is equal to or close to 1, would put us into phase 1 or 2 on the Delaware roadmap. And that would be situation dependent, where districts would have to make determinations about the openness of their buildings. And then, of course, the final possible scenario where there is significant virus spread in our communities, which would be an R-naught greater than 1, which is something that we experienced in the early outbreak here in Delaware and across the United States of America. And that obviously resulted in our school buildings being closed. So if we're in a situation like that, that's going to result in school closures, obviously, for periods of time. I think it's important to understand that what's really driving whether or not we are physically in school or doing remote instruction is really out of the hands or out of the realm of what this committee is going to deal with. It's going to be determined by public health and how infectious the disease is and how much it is spreading within our communities at a given time when school is set to start. So that's something that we will have to wait and see how it plays out. And I think it's important that we keep our thinking fluid, so that as we begin to give determinations and some of our expertise, we think about how we could exist in any one of these scenarios, regardless of how virulent the COVID-19 is in Delaware in the upcoming months and year. Go to the next slide. And Dr. Gann, feel free to step in or jump in if there's anything that I miss. I'll give you some terminology here just to further set your mindset here. In minimal spread scenarios, so this is no to minimal spread throughout our communities. It's defined as very few, if any, active COVID-19 cases locally in our communities, with the R-naught significantly less than 1. This would be an ideal scenario. This corresponds to, obviously, as we said before, late phase 2 or 3 of the Delaware reopening plans. And if this were the case, come the end of the summer, we would look to have schools open. And of course, that would be more like a regular scenario during the beginning of a regular year. Let's go on to the next one.
And Mr. Giska, I think the only thing that I would remind folks of is that the R-naught is really the number of people infected by one person.
Correct.
Yeah.
So for example, the flu, which many of us are familiar with and have had, if you get the flu, the R-naught on the flu is usually less than 1, and you might infect maybe one other person, maybe 2 other people, or maybe not even one other person when you have the flu. Whereas the R-naught on an illness like COVID-19 went, all the way up in some cases, places around the world, up to around 5, which is a pretty significant difference and just shows how contagious it can be when the disease is not contained in our communities. So that's a great point, Dr. Gann. The second scenario, just to give a little bit more clarity around it, would be minimal to moderate spread. This is where our R-naught is closer to or equal to 1, with a significant amount of circulating disease in a given geographic area. This level of community spread corresponds to phase 1 or 2 of the Delaware reopening plan, which is kind of closer to where we are currently right now. And hopefully this continues to improve, but we'll have to wait and see. If this is the status come the beginning of the school year time, we would look likely to have a hybrid of schools open and remote learning happening simultaneously. And that, I think, what goes without saying, will require some of the most divergent thinking and problem solving in any of these scenarios. And then we'll talk about our final scenario, the next slide, which would be substantial spread. If there's substantial spread like we saw at the beginning of the outbreak, or perhaps even an accelerated spread, like we talked about having a fall peak, this would be where we have expected when case counts in Delaware have increased or accelerated rapidly. The R naught would be significantly greater than 1, and state leaders would have decided to return to phase 1 of the Delaware reopening plan. So this would be a step backward, and it would result in continued remote learning as we start the school year in much the manner of which we finished it. So those are sort of the public health implications and how we need to frame our thinking. And again, I encourage us, as we have an opportunity to share some of our ideas, and I know you have some really great ideas that we need to think about, well, how will this exist in the different scenarios? And I think Dr. Gant has done a great job in setting up a process for us where we can share in each one of those scenarios individually. So let's go ahead and move on to our criteria and considerations. So based on feedback that we've gotten from our stakeholders, we determined that there is a list of about 5 considerations that are paramount for our consideration during the course of these 5 meetings that we have coming up. So we want to look at each one of these considerations in each of the scenarios we discussed before, but let's just focus in right now on what these are, because these are the keys to equity in education if we continue forward in any of those scenarios. So based on the feedback, these are the things that we have. Number 1, we want to put structures in place that communicate with every family and student directly. And that's going to be a really important part of the work we do to ensure equity, is to have communication with those families and students directly. We want to look at how we can actively and effectively engage every student, including students who need additional support in learning. So that's going to be an important thing, where we want to look at equity and make sure that all students have an opportunity to learn. Even those who need additional support, we want to be there for them and give them what they need. Identify approaches that meet every learner's needs in their learning environment. So this is challenging because depending on where we're at, every single student may have a different environment around them. And how are we going to ensure equity if we have students learning in different environments? So we have to think about those things. Number 4, determine adaptations needed to support every learner in varied learning environments. So how are we going to adapt to those situations? And finally, number 5, our key consideration will be to provide support for every student and their family in the transition between learning environments. Because there is so much uncertainty about how the COVID-19 disease will play out and how it will spread or not spread in the future, we want to make sure that we prepare families and students for transitioning back and forth between these scenarios so that they can seamlessly have an academic experience and all be successful under those criteria. So that's going to be a challenge for us as well. But we believe that if these 5 considerations are met and we have solid recommendations around them, that the LEAs throughout the state and all schools and charters and public institutions and private institutions will be able to take that and create plans and paths forward that will ensure equity for all their students in the academic arena. So we're excited to hear your thoughts. Dr. Gant, we ready to move on to recommendations?
We are. And so what we thought we would do is look at each of the 3 scenarios. And we're going to begin with minimal spread. We went back and forth about, should we start with where we are now with the remote learning, or should we start with minimal? But if we know what our new normal looks like, our baseline is, then we're able to determine what that should look like in the other scenario. So we thought, let's start slow. Let's start with what it should be like in a minimal situation, a minimal spread situation where school were back in session. And again, we're going to have to really work hard on thinking about these 5 areas. There's a health and wellness committee that's working on whether or not that occurs or not. We're just going to really focus in on those areas. There's a little link here, and I think I can pull it up and show you what Gidget or what Cricket will be typing in. So she's going to add your comments. Whatever you say under minimal spread in these five areas, whatever you say under minimal to moderate and significant. So by the time we leave our meeting today, we will have lots of recommendations around what it would look like if, as Mr. Giska just said, we have to shift from one scenario to the other midstream.
And Dr. Gant, one thing that we had talked about leading up to this call, just in considering our facilitation of this meeting. So as we go through these scenarios, there are so many different backgrounds, so many different expertise and skill sets within this group. So as we go through each one of the considerations under the different conditions, that may be a place where you want to go ahead and say, oh, I have something that I would like to contribute to the list here. Certainly everyone can contribute to everything if they would like to, but you don't have to contribute to every single thing in every single scenario. It's up to you. I know we have a lot of things on our mind right now. So if it's a place where you feel like you can contribute and have some expertise in, or have some thoughts that are very important in, please go ahead and either put your hand up in the participant list or go ahead and unmute yourself and speak up. But we're not necessarily going to go around the horn. We're going to wait for you to offer your thoughts. Correct, Dr. Gant?
That is correct.
Okay. All right, so let's take a look at this educational equity in a minimal spread situation. This would be if we were returning to schools, most likely. So the first thing we would want to think about is how we were going to put structures into place to communicate with every family and student directly. So at this time, if anybody has any considerations or thoughts or anything that they would like to add as far as advice, this would be the time to do so.
Caitlin Thomas has her hand raised.
Hi. So fortunately, I think that because the situation that we are in now, a lot of teachers have gotten it down about how to communicate with their families. So I think that we honestly could just continue that same route, because right now every teacher does have that link, or at least they do in my school.
Caitlin, can you talk just briefly a little bit more about what that looks like, in your mind, as far as doing a sufficient job of that and making sure it happens?
Yeah, so just using myself for an example, every week I get an email from every single one of my teachers, and that lays out all of my work for the week, my expectations, and it also just kind of checks in with me. Now, I understand that some families do not have that accessibility to the technology. So I think that at that point, while the teachers are communicating through email, they could also be communicating through personal meetings. So if a family did have to come in on every other weekend or a day after school, then I think that would work.
Okay. Thank you, Caitlin.
Senator Lockman, put your hand up.
Sure, thank you. I think one of the things that that I noticed as an issue sort of during the height of the pandemic, which I think is still relevant and was relevant before it, was there are certain students who are particularly difficult to reach. And I think that while the pandemic highlighted that, I think that is true, even in a minimal spread open school kind of a setup. And so I guess the question that it raised for me, which from a point of view of equity, I'd love to see answered in any of these scenarios, is just sort of what is the capacity of each school district to sort of seek out engagement with those harder to reach students and their families? Do they have the capacity to, if technology and those types of typical communications are not, particularly effective, is there someone who can make that outreach of physically going to a home or determining that? And I guess my concern would just be, do our LEAs have that capacity? Who's doing those types of work? Is it the classroom educator? Is it someone else on staff? And if not, what kind of supports are needed to make sure that can be delivered regardless?
Excellent. Yeah, that's definitely something that needs to be considered across every district. Who is doing the outreach when we are having trouble or coming up against the barriers to communicating with students? Great.
And I would say that we certainly want to put that in our spreadsheet. as identifying who would be, identifying who is in that role. So that's really going to be important. That's a structure that we need to put in place, identifying who's in the role to reach all students, especially hard to reach students. Thank you.
Right.
And just one thing I would to add to Senator Lockman's comment, Dr. Gann, as well, is that not only who is in the role of reaching out, but also a process or a system in place for making sure that those students are identified and that doesn't get slipped through the cracks, that we are identifying who we can't contact and making those efforts necessary to get in contact with them for support.
Absolutely. There are others that have their hands raised. Kevin, I might need your help on that.
Okay, we have a raised hand from Ms. Har.
All right, Ms. Har.
Hi. So at the beginning of this shutdown, Dover High School or Capital School District had each teacher just call our second period class. So I was only in charge of trying to reach out to those families, and we created this spreadsheet so any of the families I wasn't able to contact, whether it was a response from an email or a phone number, it gave the school the ability to see the students who we weren't able to reach, whose phone numbers were disconnected, but it was broken up for responsibility. So I was responsible for my 2A class, but then the counselors were then responsible to make contact number 2 if that student made it on the list of hard to reach.
So you have a communication plan.
Yeah. So I wasn't sure if that would help with, I don't know, divvying out whose role and responsibility it was if you spread it out a little bit.
Sure. Thank you. And keep in mind that we're starting, I know that we're currently in our remote, we're at the extreme right now. Keep in mind that we're discussing right now the minimal spread. Now, some of it goes across the board, it doesn't matter. But I want to make sure that we capture that as well. Kevin, can you give us another raised hand?
We have a few more raised hands. Dr. Alonso has a raised hand.
Yes, hello, thank you. Yeah, and I am aware that we're still thinking about the minimal spread, but I have to say, I hope that we're keeping in mind, particularly our schools that have primarily our most vulnerable students in the state, being low socioeconomic status, ELLs, homeless, and those with learning differences. There are some schools that are highly concentrated, and therefore, when we get to these issues of folks parents not being in contact, it's as if we need more staffing. And I know that is, I just want to raise that's a real, it's a real phenomenon, especially in our schools that are highly concentrated with those vulnerable populations.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Mr. Giska and Ms. Hines, I have a thought here. We're going to continue with the raised hands, but it seems as though we're going to continue to bleed across all three. And so, Ms. Hines, if you can, when someone raises their hand, because we're going to do all 5 of these in all 3 areas, if we can capture it in the right box, then we could probably just move through each one. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I think that because, this experience was so jarring and it's so fresh in everyone's mind that we're probably in more of a moderate to, high spread mindset. So it's going to be hard, but yeah, I think that's what we should do is let's go ahead and talk about each one of these. And then Cricket or Dr. Gant, whenever we're capturing these, let's try to, if we can identify sort of where our mindset is, and then we'll try to put that into the right box on our spreadsheet, because everything everyone said has been tremendous. So it's hard to get our mind out of the triage phase, because it was very jarring. I certainly understand. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Dr. Gant, I am capturing everything too. And like you said, we can move things around in terms of the boxes, but I'm capturing all the recommendations so far.
Thank you.
Beautiful, Cricket. Thank you.
Kevin, you had additional hands raised?
I do, and several more have now raised their hands. If I could ask everyone a favor, when you've raised your hand and been called on and you're you have completed your statement. If you would toggle the hand off, that would be helpful. I apologize if I'm getting them out of order. They kind of came rapid fire. I believe Representative Williams had the next hand.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Absolutely.
So I guess I have a statement. I don't know what the structures would be best to communicate with every family and student directly, because I don't work in the school system. So I guess for me, the question would be, we should be asking the people that are actually doing it today, what is working? We should be speaking to the charter schools, the school districts, and asking them these questions. I cannot answer this question because I'm not teaching remote learning. I'm not part of the school system. I am a legislator. So for me, I think it's important that we ask this question to the people that are doing this every day.
Representative, that's an excellent point that you make, and that's one of the things where, this body is made up of very experiences. We have some educators. I think that it was Gwendolyn that spoke a little bit about her school's communication plan. So you're right. We do need to hear that, and we do need to, when we leave here as a body, go out and continue these conversations with folks in our organizations or that we touch, so that we can bring that back. But like I said, there'll be some people who some of these scenarios or these criterion will speak to their expertise, and some will be more aligned to others. But it's an excellent point you made, Representative Williams. Thank you.
And if I could just make just one more statement, like it's hard we can't always use the same model, like for a school that has 400 children to a school district that might have thousands and thousands of children. So, I mean, we have to look at various ways that these schools and the districts are communicating. So it's not one size fits all. And some districts or charters may be doing it, like have some really great ideas that others may not have thought of. And it's really good, I think, for us to collaborate with all of them to see what is working. And like, I'm sure the districts and charters are keeping data of their success rates and, how they're able to get a hold of families and the students. So I appreciate everyone's comment, but I just really wanted to make sure that I was clear about that. Thank you.
Fully understand. Thank you.
Okay, I believe our next hand was Ms. Ingram.
Thank you. I just wanted to add, I know that in this situation we're talking about, we're thinking about, transitioning back to school, but we need to remember what the students have been living under for these past couple of months. We're going to need some kind of transition to work through that. So bearing that in mind, I believe one of the things we might need to do is to think about increasing the capacity. And I think someone mentioned it, adding additional staff members who are going to be able to help us with this communication. As it is now, we have students who are moving, students who have been lost in the shuffle, students we don't know where they are. Email do not reach every student. We need some staff on the ground. I was speaking today, I was on a meeting with school social workers. They do home visits. So we need to think about who in the district is capable of doing home districts, be that a social worker, the educator, the administrator. We also need to think about how we're reaching out using the telephone, letters, but we do need to think about increasing the capacity. We're going to have a severe transition time, and we are going to need as many boots on the ground as possible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, next we have Dr. Burrows.
Thank you. I think if we look at all three levels, if we look at the first level, it's more of what was the normal when we were in session, if we look at it that way. But I appreciate the point. The social and emotional piece is going to be key when we return, and just having those supports in place, not only for the students, but connecting those with families within our districts. But the communication, it sounds like under this, most of the kids are going to be back in school. So you're going to have direct contact to be able to communicate with them directly through their teachers, the counselors that are there with them. Families, of course, the systems that we have in place for communicating with families or had in place for communicating with families will be key. Just making sure that we're following those systems and that we're communicating with them and making sure that they're feeling connected with the school body. And I think one of the things that we do as a district is every at the beginning of every year, teachers are to connect with their families, make a good call to families at the beginning of the year within that first few weeks. And I think that's a key piece of this. As you transition into the minimal to moderate, which is a place where we haven't been necessarily, it's going to be a little more difficult. What I'm seeing or what I'm envisioning or what I heard you say is that some kids will be in session and some kids will be doing it remotely or virtually. And so that's going to cause a lot of angst in the system with teachers because it's almost going to be like a double load on that. And I think we're going to have to take a lot of time on that stage as we look at it just to see how we make sure that it's not an overload on our teachers and on our staff when we hit that phase, because it's going to be difficult. You're going to have kids in session, so that's going to be a little bit easier to communicate with than kids that aren't necessarily in front of you, but they're virtually. And so I think just the systems that we put in place, some of them we are doing now, but it's going to be a little bit overwhelming. And then the third phase, I think we're doing a lot of that now, and I think we can celebrate successes we've had in communicating with students and with families. And then to Representative Williams' point, learn some things that other districts and charters have done that have been successful in making sure that we're hitting all students. So we've done Zoom calls, we've done phone calls, has gone as far as families that we weren't connecting with at the beginning of this to send letters to them and have had high success on then getting them connected once we've done letters and things like that. So I think the hardest phase of this is going to be that in-between scenario 2 phase, because that's going to be a lot of adjustments for us.
I agree. I agree with you. It's going to feel inconsistent. And so that one's going to be the tough one. And thank you for kind of thinking through each of the scenarios as they came. The one thing that I do want to raise, we have 5 of these, and I want to make sure that we get through the other 4, because honestly, this one was our easier one. And so I don't want to cut anyone off if they want to add something very quickly to the structures for communication that has not yet been said. I don't want to cut anyone off, but I want to make sure we get to the tough ones where we can really use your expertise.
How about if there's something you would like to add to this particular one right now, go ahead and leave your hand up and Kevin will identify it. If you're willing to move on to the next one and possibly have a chance, we do have other meetings coming up where these themes will be coming back up. You can take your hand down. Kevin, how are we looking?
I believe we have 3 hands. Ms. Vitale would be next.
Hi, yeah, so I just wanted to chime in because, and again, I was thinking of the minimalist, like, if we're going back to school. So, I mean, what we do is I think the key to all communication is going to be building those relationships. And that being said, the reality is like we said, if we're coming back to school, we are going to have that contact, but letting our families and our students know that we are there with support. So that's going to look like our communication, like that we need to have things available. Like we need to have the supports from the counselors. We need to have resources for families. We need to have resources for students for SEL and all these things that they know they can come to us and communicate with us with their needs and the trauma that they're going to have coming back through this transition. I also think we're going to need to be very realistic about getting updated contact information from everyone, because similarly, someone else spoke about that. So many families have moved, so many numbers have changed. So like that updated list is going to be absolutely critical. And not only that, but I think we need to be proactive, because no matter what happens next, I think we need to say what is it that you're going to need if we go into remote learning or something happens. What does your family need? Is it going to be access to translation? Is it going to be access to internet devices? Another type of learning? What worked for you? What didn't? I think the communication piece, beyond just how we can contact them, needs to be transparent. And what supports did they find they needed or would them be more successful, and to plan for that. I think we're going to have to be very proactive and really start building those relationships as we always do, but really try to make that communication open so that we are able to, whatever comes, better meet their needs.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent point.
Can we have a hand up from Ms. Gregg?
Hi, yes, thank you. I just wanted to add that I find that what worked for us at Lake Forest over the course of the school year, we always had an all call. So the building from each building, they would inform the families what was happening that week, upcoming week. So usually like on a Saturday or a Sunday, you would get a call from the school stating what was going on that week to keep you updated on things. And if something that hit the whole district, you would get a call from the district, an all call. So I think keeping up with all calls would be very helpful just to keep people abreast of what's going on when we first go back to school. That's my sense. That's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I think that may be all the hands. Representative Williams, I still see your hand up. Was there another comment there, or was that the
Sorry,
previous one?
I did not follow the rules. I apologize. I'm removing my hand now. Sorry.
No worries, no worries. Thank you. So that would be all the hands.
So let's go ahead and then transition now for the sake of time. We do have 4 more. The next consideration we want to think about is actively and effectively engaging every student, including students who need additional support in learning. And this is obviously a very broad topic, but we're anxious to hear some of your thoughts and expertise in this particular area. So we'll do the same thing. Go ahead and put your hand up and we'll move forward like that. Dr. Gant, sound good?
That sounds wonderful.
Okay. Kevin, where are we at?
I do not think we have any hands.
Yeah, this one's harder to figure. This is communication. We all have a lot of times ideas about how we can create systems for that, but effectively engaging every student, those who need additional support included in learning, is something a bit more abstract.
Oh, the hands are coming.
Lovely.
Maybe it was just a delay on my end. Okay, so I hope I get them in order here. I believe Dr. Lawson was the first one I saw.
Hi. So I'm just struggling with this a bit because my hand was originally up asking a clarifying question about whether minimal spread is business as usual. Based on Dr. Burrow's comments, it appears that it is business as usual. So I guess I'm finding this one hard because districts had their own ways to kind of do these things. And it's just a gentle suggestion that we start maybe where we are now and work backwards. I don't know. I'm having trouble with this one because it is back to normal. And I guess we'll never be normal. There will be precautionary pieces in place and those universal precautions, but I'm just struggling working through this one right now. That's just my 2 cents. But we can keep going. It's just hard because every district had their own way of doing things as it relates to communication and engaging students. Because my clarifying question was, is this kind of business as usual? And I think based on what Dr. Burrow said, the answer to that is yes. So I apologize. I'm going to think some more, but that's just my 2 cents right now.
No, I think that's a good point. Dr. Gant, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, what I was going to say, Dr. Lawson, is if you have ideas around that, that's okay. I mean, even if you have ideas on how that was done effectively, you have, samples and things that we can learn from and things that we can share with others. That's what we're putting in the spreadsheet. So even when we were in a minimal spread situation or a no spread situation, we can always get better at this one. And so if you have some strategies that you would like to share in this space, that's fine. So if you need a little more time to think, it's all good. Okay, Kevin, back to you.
Ms. Thomas, please.
Hi. So even when we're regularly in school, the only way that teachers are going to understand what each individual student needs is by asking them. So I know that this is kind of going back to that communication aspect, but the only way to ensure that we're engaging all students is to know what each student needs to be engaged. So if that means having a Zoom call to them before we do instruction or meeting with them before we do instruction, we as teachers, we have to understand what each individual student needs because it's like snowflakes. No one is the same. I just wanted to kind of put that out there.
No, thank you, Caitlin. Dr. Gant, if I could respond just real quick to that, as well as, just to draw a parallel between that and what Mrs. Vitelli shared with us a little bit ago in the last one, I think the idea of proactiveness is sort of comes up. And I think that there's probably going to be a lot of value in talking to students, not only about their, how we can communicate best with them, but also about what their experience was like during remote learning, and how, how that affected them, or how that helped them, or did not help them. So I think that there's a bit of a theme emerging here where proactive and information gathering is going to be really important for us, talking to students, talking to families, and just seeing, what was the experience like of a shift to remote learning, and what can we do to improve not only communication, but also learning, whether it's physical in the classroom or through a digital space. I just noticed that theme emerging, and I wanted to kind of put a point on it, but thank you, Caitlin.
Okay, and we have a hand from Dr. Alonso.
Thank you. Actually, you actually addressed what I was saying, as what I was thinking anyway. I think that at the beginning of school, it is going to be so important that we're meeting not only with our students, but meeting with our families, to learn where they're at, to learn again what worked, what didn't, and that we have to actually be working. I know we're working in the minimal spread, but we have to be anticipating that we may be going remote. So the gathering the data so that we can then have some structures in place that will be supportive is I think critical.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Representative Williams.
You're muted, Representative Williams.
Thank you. So I guess my question or statement is, because the school is open and it's minimum spread, I would think that we would depend on we would like ask the IEP team and they would decide what is best for the student. What would the school normally do if a child was out for long-term illness? How would they handle it? So again, this would be up to the spec ed team that oversees IEP or 504 plan.
Okay, absolutely.
And Representative Williams, I agree with that for special ed students. I think what the nuance is for this number 2 is it's for all students. So when we think about every group of students, whether it's EL, whether it's, whatever group it is, gifted students, how do we ensure that students are actively and effectively engaged? We were in a remote learning committee meeting once, and they were talking about how some of the students that were higher performing students started to kind of tune out. And so how do we make sure that all students are engaged? So thank you for the special education side of it. You're absolutely right. But thinking about all students when we think about equity again and our definition of equity. So thank you.
I think that, and thank you. I think that is my point, but we're talking about the school is open. So I would think that we would look at what do we normally do when a child is out for a long-term illness? What do we do? And now that we have the remote learning, that is like, I've heard teachers and administrators say, no more snow days because we have access to remote learning now. So would it be possible to have a teacher, I don't think we can expect the classroom teacher to do this because they already have to engage their actual classroom, but maybe have other types of educators that we could hire to engage students who are out long-term because of the COVID-19, possibly have other teachers engaged in that way. So we don't put that extra burden on our classroom teachers because they already have so much going on, that maybe the state, we could look at hiring other teachers, maybe teachers who have kids at home that are looking for a part-time job, or even retired educators that are looking just to work minimum time but still want to engage with our class, with the students. Hire them to help with this issue as students who have COVID, maybe they could instruct them. Just a thought.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Williams.
Okay, we have a hand from Ms. Ingram.
Hello, I'm gonna say it again. I know that we're talking about, back to school, but I don't believe we're gonna be talking about business as usual. So in order to effectively and actively engage every student, the educators who are involved with the students are gonna need more time to put together a plan. They're gonna need to work with the teachers the students had at the end of the year to get information from them about what worked for them and how they were able to meet the needs. If they were able to meet the needs of that student, they're gonna need to work with their team for this year to think about what that looks like when they step in the door. Rebecca spoke about creating relationships. They're going to need more time to work on creating those relationships in the beginning of the year before we can start with academics. We need to make sure that they're feeling safe being back in school again, that they're feeling safe being away from their families for such a long time, worrying about what's happening when they're not at home. We're going to need opportunities to engage them in ways we haven't done before. And that's going to need, we as educators are going to need some professional development to think about how we can reach these students in different ways to make sure that everyone's learning.
Excellent point. Thank you.
Okay, so we still have a few hands up here. I'm not sure. I think some of these have made a comment on this slide. If you could check your hand and toggle it off if you have made your comment, that way I know who to call next, please. Thank you. Okay, Dr. Lawson?
So I apologize. I certainly didn't mean to imply that business as usual wouldn't mean we would need to do additional things. But what my implication was is that we would leave it to those LEAs and those educators to do that business, right? That is, they know these families, they know their children, they know. So school being open is much easier when we talk about all of this because we have the ability to communicate. Yes, it will be expanded and it will be different, but we will be able to do those things. So I certainly didn't mean to imply that we would go back to doing the way we were without handling all of the challenges around it. It was just difficult for me to wrap my head around it because we all have our own flavors as different LEAs, as charters. We have our ways of doing things. And I think this is the easiest category to talk about. So I just didn't want to be misconstrued in terms of we won't have to do additional. Again, I was just trying to wrap my head around giving suggestions to folks when schools open and the kids are there and they're connected back to families.
No, remember our norms. We assume everyone's coming from a good place, and that's what we thought as well with this. You both brought up excellent points, and I think that it's important that we not only think about what the new business as usual is going to be like, but we also recognize that LEAs have some structures in place already that have been effective. But I think one of the things Dr. Gant was hoping for is that we share some of those ideas as well. If you have something that's being particularly impactful in your district, this is a great forum to share that, and it can make its way into recommendations. So thank you very much for clarifying and for saying that. All right, Kevin, who do we have still waiting?
I believe we have no hands at this time.
Can I just, Dr. Gant, is it appropriate for me to offer one thing here?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So one thing, my head a lot of times spent thinking about what students are doing when they are in classrooms, and of course, recently it transitioned to what are students doing when they are in digital spaces. There's a acronym which we use frequently in education, HQIM, which stands for High Quality Instructional Materials. One thing that I think is really important, at least from my perspective, Delaware is a small state, and in that there can be some very powerful chances to coordinate efforts. If we want to make sure that all students are actively engaged, I think one of the most important things is what are we asking them to do? What kind of instructional materials are we providing for them? And are we providing instructional materials and curriculum that have a proven track record of impacting positively students who do need additional support? Students in the SEL group, students who have English as a English language learning families. So, that is something that I know that education has been focused on in the past 2 years, quite a bit. But it's something that I just wanted to bring up now because I think, no matter what the student is, whether they're a student who naturally excels in school, a student who needs additional support, whatever the case is, and whatever the scenario is, I think that there's a unique opportunity in a state the size of Delaware to really focus our energies together on providing the highest quality instructional materials for students, and hitting some of those marks along the way. So just something I wanted to offer in terms of number 2.
And I appreciate that, because we're also thinking about that in each scenario. So what does high quality instruction look like across the scenarios? Because that is also the way to engage. I also don't want to, I don't want to dismiss what was shared about the emotional state of students when they return. And so we're not at all suggesting that we don't pay attention to that, but we do have health and wellness. That's exactly what they're focused on. And so we try to narrow our focus. If you remember, one of our norms was to remain focused on our goal. And really, we're trying to get those best practices, because we know there's a wealth of knowledge and expertise in this group. And so that's why we really have been focusing and honing in on this part of it. So we've got about 15 minutes to get through 3 more. So
let's go ahead and dive into number 3, Dr. Gant, and then after those hands are dealt with, we can make our evaluations on how to move forward. Do you think that's a plan?
That'd be great.
Okay, so let's dive into number 3 and hear some of your thoughts and considerations around this. We want to identify approaches that meet every learner's needs in their learning environment. And we talked about learning environments being varied because of the COVID situation, but also throughout our families and homes and communities. So what are some thoughts that we can record around your expertise there? Kevin, I'll wait for hands.
No hands just yet.
Okay.
Okay, we have Ms. Ingram.
Excellent.
I just have a quick clarifying question. I'm sorry. This is the first time that I'm seeing all the recommendations, and I know that we're going through them in order. If I have additional comments about one that we've put to rest for right now, or ones that we don't get to, what do I do with that information? I'm sorry to bring this up. Well, not really sorry, but thanks.
No need to apologize. That's an excellent question. Time is always short. Dr. Gant, how would you like Ms. Ingram to proceed?
So she would just share it with us, and we will put it in our parking lot, or it may fit into an upcoming meeting, which is why we want to put it in the parking lot. So it may be something that just needs to go there.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Ingram, if you, like Dr. Gant said, put it in the parking lot, I will make sure that it gets into, because the spreadsheet, we're going to definitely just clean up and move around a little bit, but I'll make sure it gets in there.
Thanks. All right, Kevin, do we have any other hands up for this particular one?
I have no other hands at this time. Oh, I apologize. Ms. Haar.
My mic on?
Yeah. Gwendolyn Hart, go ahead.
I was reading on the opportunities roadmap, and in one of the sections for the teachers and instructions says to create a technology use survey to assess the number and the types of technologies teachers are using. Could we kind of adapt that to see which types of technology or ways that we have been doing things across the state, and survey teachers to be like, well, I had a lot of kids engaged because I used Schoology, or a lot of kids engaged because I used Edmentum, whatever other programs, to help us identify certain approaches that have worked better?
Absolutely. We can add that to our spreadsheet.
It's a fantastic suggestion. Any other hands, Kevin?
There are no other hands.
Called wait time.
We have a hand from Representative Williams.
All right, Representative Williams.
Hi. So I guess I'm just going to reiterate what I stated earlier. I think that we need to, and I don't know how you would do this. I don't know if you could have a separate committee or a separate group, but I really believe that we need to have educators involved in these conversations, district admins. I cannot make these decisions about identify approaches that meet every learner's needs in their learning environment. I'm not an educator. I'm a lawmaker who writes bills. So, and I appreciate everyone's input here. I just don't think that some of us are able to be able to answer some of these questions.
Sure. Sure.
I'm not trying to put a damper on this because I really appreciate everyone's input, but for me, it is best to have educators, admin, from VOTEX, from charters, from magnets, from traditional school districts have these conversations, talk about what is working, what's not working. And we're talking about schools that are open. So I understand that may not be the way that we're used to school being open, but it's open. So I don't know how we're going to get there by asking me or Senator Lockman or Senator Pettyjohn these questions. I just think that we might need a little bit more of an engagement here through, other stakeholder groups.
So Representative Williams, you hit the nail on the head. This group does not do that. This group simply provides things to think about, considerations, and then that is sent to LEAs, to charters, to those groups that you talked about, educators, to really dig into what that's going to look like. So we're not telling them, we're not giving them this is what you shall do. That's kind of what I shared at the very beginning. We are simply saying these are considerations for you to think about as you're developing your plans. And so districts and charters and privates and they're going to make those decisions based on our recommendations. So our role, the reason that our committee is so diversified is because everybody has a different role in this. So we've got our pre-K teacher that's able to speak from the elementary side, from the very beginning side. We have high school folks that can think about it from the other end of it. We've got building leaders. We've got lots of folks in the space that can contribute in different ways. So I don't want you all to feel pressure. And I think Mr. Giska may have said it, but I don't want you to feel pressure that you have to respond to all of these, because some of it really is gathering information so that you're able to then advocate in the way that you choose to advocate. And so this is really about gathering information and learning from each other.
And Representative Williams, if I could also just say that, yourself and Senator Pettyjohn and Senator Lockerman, you all bring an experience that we don't have, where constituents come to you all the time and they have thoughts and opinions and feelings about education, and that happened pre-COVID, and I'm sure it certainly has happened in your offices post-COVID. And I think it's important that the practitioners, and there are many practitioners like you spoke about here on this call, just like Dr. Gant was saying, myself included, I had to help our team to come into remote instruction in a week's time, and that was very challenging. But I think we would all have some value in taking the experiences and the things your constituents say to you, or the experiences you've had visiting schools in your districts, and just kind of giving that for us to think about as well, because when you're in schools and when you're in it, when you're very close to it, sometimes there are things that you don't realize. Sometimes there are things that get missed, and those are things that may come to your offices. So that's certainly why you're here, and what perspective that all of you can bring. And you shouldn't feel any pressure to have to answer it, but you've certainly been helpful so far. So I just wanted to put my 2 cents in there for the representatives and elected officials that are joining us tonight.
Oh, and I also want to say Representative Shoup as well. So I didn't mean
Shoup as well, yes.
I didn't mean to leave him off as well. So I do value all my colleagues' input, but we're not educators, so I can only listen to what people who reach out to me say, and I think educators want to have more of a voice in this process. So thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I believe Ms. Schneider was next.
All right, Laura Schneider.
Hi. I thank Representative Williams for sharing that, because I do know, like, on behalf of DASA, they were pretty disappointed that there's only one principal on every committee, the folks who are really like opening the buildings along with the teachers. So they did want to have more of a voice as well. And along those lines, when we're thinking about considerations, because I can't imagine what kind of guidelines we're even going to provide to districts in 3 weeks with only a 90-minute meeting. But I'm not really sure how we're going to address our youngest learners who, when you look at chronic absence data, And you see, even just by missing 10% of the school year, how far they fall behind. I am very worried about our kindergarten and first grade kids who are learning how to read, and minimal spread, not so much. And that's the only thing we got through so far. But I just want to point out that we need to do something different, because remote learning, unless doesn't really work for young learners to teach kids how to read. And if we don't do something drastically different, and this continues into next year, I am afraid we're going to have a lot of illiterate children leaving, aren't going to third grade prepared, where they're supposed to be able to read to learn, and not learning how to read. So I'm not really sure what that looks like, and maybe Sharon Walpole can help with that a little bit as one of our, statewide experts on that. I know she's given us some guidance, but unless you're sitting next to a kid, teaching them how to read is going to be very challenging. And I do think we need a group of educators, because the guidelines that we were given for the first remote learning plans was slim at best. And I think we need to do better for our schools. And providing vague guidelines is maybe not good enough. So my thoughts anyway.
So Ms. Schneider, I'm really glad that, again, in our efforts of being solutions focused, you've identified a challenge that we've also identified on the list. So in our again, our norms of being solutions focused, what solutions would you suggest? I heard you say something around professional learning, so we might want to make sure we add that in. Are there other suggestions you have for our youngest learners for solutions?
I'm at a K-2 school, so that's primarily what I work with. And I don't know, I'm not sure what that looks like, because I don't know that we've found it. Like, our kids at least had a foundation leaving kindergarten in March, but children who can't recognize a letter, I'm not sure what that looks like myself. I think we need not only practitioners, but experts in the field of teaching reading who can help us. I don't know if anybody's ever taught kids how to read remotely.
Sure.
And I do not have the answers, but maybe like Representative Williams says, maybe folks who are teaching kids how to read might have more of those.
Okay. I really think the professional learning that you're really onto something there. So thank you for that. Kevin?
I believe our next hand is Senator Pettyjohn.
Thanks, Kevin, and thank you, Monica. Throughout this whole thing, one of the big challenges we have here in Sussex, and everybody that's on this call from Sussex knows, is access to broadband. Yes. And I don't care if you are the wealthiest family or the poorest family. There are areas that money doesn't make a difference in terms of access to broadband. There is a program that's going on right now. We funded it through the bond bill a couple years ago, where we are expanding broadband access to rural Sussex and Kent counties. But that process is slow. And whenever you're talking about anything that is not an in-person learning experience, if you're talking any type of technology, any type of remote, that is a real challenge in Western Kent and pretty much all of Sussex County. We were able to repurpose some money through the stimulus, through Department of Education, to get towers installed on an expedited basis. I think instead of the towers being done by middle of next year, they're going to be done by next month. But that's just the main base towers. That's not installing it to the hundreds or thousands of homes that are going to be needed in order to get this type of solution to work. So as we are going through this, as we are looking at equity, which is great, equity versus equality, great, visualization of that. The biggest equity problem that we're facing down here is access to information.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, I just, Senator Pettyjohn, I mean, working in Laurel, this is, I don't want to belabor the point, but it's definitely a challenge. Personally, I believe the internet needs to be like water. Everyone needs to have access to it. And that's something certainly, you know, that our elected officials, and it sounds like, and obviously you have been working on, I've heard about the towers and the programs, and I appreciate that deeply, because the idea of conducting school in the middle of a public health crisis or throughout a public health crisis is obviously near, I mean, it's very difficult. It is an extremely heavy lift. And that is one thing that can certainly put some level on the playing field. And it's something that that our voices from this committee need to make sure we raise up and say this is a factor that will we need to close the tech gap for families. And honestly, I think there are many districts and organizations, and I think there are ways in the state where our schools can effectively provide families with devices, but if those devices aren't connecting, that doesn't matter. So it's a much appreciated point, and it's something that we all need to speak to everyone we can about, because that's something we have to address even beyond this process. It's a great point.
Thanks, Ashley. Appreciate it.
So we are down to 3 minutes, and we have a conclusion, but I don't want to stop people that have not had any opportunity to speak tonight. And so if there's someone that has not had an opportunity to speak that would like to weigh in very quickly on, we did not get to 4 and 5. So we'll just have to take a look at our data and see how we weave that into our next meetings moving forward. But if there's somebody that would like to give us a closing thought around these recommendations and some ideas and strategies that we can add, please do so at this time. So Kevin, are there any hands?
No hands up yet. Okay. I heard it. I'm not seeing a fresh hand here.
Then we're going to go on and
we do have a hand.
Okay.
Laura Schneider.
Yep. I'm just wondering, like, if this is the list of recommendation, like if this is an example of the kinds of recommendations we're giving, or when and how are we going to make these more concrete in the, it's 90 minutes once a week from now till July 1?
So at the beginning of the meeting, we shared that we're going to focus on 3 topics. And, that these are key considerations. These aren't the recommendations. These are key considerations. The recommendations is the feedback that you all are providing.
Okay, because the slide says recommendations on it. So
Laura.
It's a link.
Oh, gotcha.
The link leads to where we're entering all of your feedback.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And so we're going to take all of that feedback and then use that to make the recommendations.
Yeah. And, you know, I think that Dr. Ganton, you know, we tried to encapsulate what is an infinitely complex issue in a very structured manner so that we could work with this group, which, although, you know, obviously we would need more representatives and expertise in a perfect world in order for us all to be able to contribute. I think that was the intention on keeping the group at least at this size. So I think we're going to reflect on it. I think we'll have some ways to continue building the consensus. But I think there are some important trends that will emerge. And I know Cricket's going to help us identify those in the feedback that everyone gave. So I think that things will start to coalesce. I know it's hard to see from the beginning, but I'm optimistic that we will have some more concrete recommendations going forward, Laura. Okay?
So as we conclude today's meeting, let's review the primary points we discussed. Equal and equity are often used synonymously, however, they are not the same. Equal is sameness or equal input. Equity is access to what is needed to succeed or equal outcome. The public health framework determines which scenario school will occur in. Minimal spread, the school buildings are open. Minimal to moderate spread is a hybrid, and significant spread, which would be remote. Educational equity is where we're going. That is our goal. So our next week's guiding question is going to be around where are we now? So we talked about where we're going, but where are we now? So the question that I really want you to reflect on is what information do we need to ensure every student is successful? Again, we weren't using the chat box, but there is a message in the chat, and I want to make sure that the public is aware of that. Is it possible to have questions that you are presenting with some time to think about it prior to our meeting? So this is the question that we will be thinking about. What information do we need to ensure every student is successful? So as you're talking to the groups that you represent, as you talk to your colleagues, really have conversation around, so what information do we need in a minimal spread situation, in a minimal to moderate, and in that significant spread situation? What is that information? I want to remind our public that please share your ideas. You can send feedback to reopening.ideas@doe.k12.de.us or leave a voicemail at 302-735-4244. The feedback that we receive, we review it every week, and we'll support our recommendations that we're providing, or our feedback that we're providing, recommendations for the academic and equity plan within the public health framework. I want to thank all of you for your engagement. It is tough to do this kind of meeting online, but you all have been incredible. I really appreciate your time, and we'll continue to see ways in which we can ensure that everyone is engaged.
Monica, if I could real quick, I just want to recognize another colleague of ours that stopped in to view the tail end of this meeting. Senator Sokola has stopped in.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Senator.
Mr. Giska, do you have anything else for us this evening?
No, I just want to thank everyone. I know that this is a tremendous thing to put your mind around, and I know that together, though, we can make this happen. Delaware is a great community. It always has been, in my experience, and communities can do anything when they put their mind to it. So we're going to make this possible, and we're going to do it together. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Our meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.